All right, welcome. We got quite a few Roman Catholics today who have been pretty vocal, piping up. I think the UB debate has sparked a lot of um, discussion, which is good. Mm, I didn't catch the entire live stream, so I don't know exactly where all they went in the latter hours. I caught the main early portion of it, so um, it was interesting. I mean, I was really hoping that Voice of Reason would bring something a little more substantial than just kind of the average, just a list of. It's almost like reading off of some article on Catholic Answers, right? It's like, you don't have unity, you don't have what we have, you don't conform to our system, so your system's false. It's just like the same old problems that we always run into, and it's weird because that whole crowd of Lofton, Ibarra, Voice of Reason, we've been making this point for about 8 years, 9 years, that it's two different systems. And so the problems in one system are not going to be the same in terms of their effects, in terms of the problems in another system. So to just simply say, well, your church has problems too, which is literally like what they repeat 90 to 95% of the time, is totally missing the argument. If we thought that the Patriarch of Constantinople or any bishop was infallible and indefectible, then it would be a fair retort to say, well, you have the same problem of patriarchs who depart from the faith and teach error and so forth. But they don't have that position. They don't have a position where it's possible for the Roman bishop after Vatican I to defect and to teach error and to teach heresy, or for the magisterium to do so. So it's just really sad that this debate can never progress beyond this level one point. And another version of the same type of argument that has been hammered ever since Lofton, David Erhan made a video on this in 2018, is if you think that the problems that are listed are defeaters for the church, being the true church, the problems of Voice of Reason lists or anybody else, if those are defeaters, then you're admitting that the church of the first 1,000 years is not the true church, whether you think it's Orthodox or Roman Catholic. If those problems are a defeater, then they defeat the the church of the first millennium as Roman Catholic because all those same problems existed in that church. It's just really bizarre that they cannot understand this argument, even though we have made this point for 7 or 8 years. It's baffling. It's like the Muslim and the dilemma, right? The Islamic dilemma problem. Hardly any of them can even repeat the argument back. And I think the more I've reflected on this and the more I think about debates, and I've been doing this for 25 years, I think that a lot of people just have a limit in terms of where they can go in terms of abstract thinking, especially when it comes to paradigm level arguments. First of all, we got a lot of people I've noticed, they don't even know what tu quoque is. They just learned this today or yesterday, or this is the first time they've even heard it. Tu quoque is not the same thing as a double standard, right? Where you're pointing out a hypocritical double standard. It depends on what's being argued as to when it's a tu quoque, right? So if I say your position suffers from this problem, blah, and then you say, well, your position has problems too. That's a dodge, and that's a tu quoque fallacy. But if I'm pointing out that the Roman Catholic system is trying to conform our standards of unity to the papal idea of unity, that's not a tu quoque. That is pointing out two different standards. That's a double standard. That's moving the goalposts. That's true for thee, but not for me. All right. That is an error. That's a fallacy. That's a mistake in reasoning. But you understand that we're having to deal with people who 90 to 95% of these people, they don't even know what critical thinking is. They don't know that the laws of logic are the rules of critical thought, and it's like a chess game. You can't violate the rules. They actually think that debate is just low tier quote mining, um, low tier gotchas, the type of stuff that like not so erudite did, right? Define this word. Oh, you can't define it according to the way I understand it. Then you don't know anything. It's bizarre. It's very similar to Protestant and Muslim approaches to things, and I think that the success that Roman Catholicism has in terms of their pop apologists is precisely the low tier element. So, in a weird way, because orthodoxy requires nuance, it requires context for papal quotes and this kind of stuff. It requires going into the history of the church, looking at the councils and the canons. It People don't want to do that, and so the lazy turn off my mind and I just do what the Pope says approach actually has a lot of appeal and a lot of power for attracting low-tier dum-dums. And so it's also a double-edged sword, though, because even though that might get a lot of numbers for Roman Catholics or even evangelical churches, like those people are low-quality people, and they're liable to move on to the next thing when the winds of doctrine blow them somewhere else. So you're not actually getting solid, reliable converts. It's kind of like when Gideon was at the water and he was trying to figure out who the best soldiers were. He didn't go for numbers. Gideon wanted the soldiers that got down on their hands and knees and lapped the water like dogs, because he knew that that was a sign and an indicator of people who were serious and who were ready to go into battle. He wasn't interested in vast numbers of dum-dums crowding the ranks and making it look like Catholicity equals big numbers. And I think the weakest part of the debate was precisely the very opening statements and rebuttals, because Voice of Reason didn't really engage with anything that Ubi said. It was all a way of just moving on and deflecting to the next problem that you have. You have this problem, you have this problem, you have this problem. And another reason that this is very difficult for Roman Catholics is not just that on average you have, 95% of people, they don't know anything about debate or critical thinking or what fallacies are or what logic is. They've never had an epistemology class. You have people that are in a system, Thomism especially, that's a foundationalist epistemology that's never understood or even thought about things at a paradigm level. So they don't understand, and they can't even conceive a system level defeater. For example, when I said to Ibarra when we had our argument in that Reason of Theology video, I said, what would be a defeater for you? And he at least admitted that a contradiction in papal teaching or in dogmatic teaching would invalidate the system. I actually kind of think that people are so dumbed down and so in delusion. I don't even think a lot of Roman Catholics even understand that that would be a system defeater. If there was a systemic level papal contradiction, if there's a dogmatic contradiction in the magisterium, that's a defeater for Roman Catholicism. And but I actually think that a lot of Roman Catholics wouldn't even think it is. That's how weird this is. If you refute, this is the strength of tag, by the way, in presuppositional apologetics in general. If you refute the underlying things that a system lies on, if you destroy those, the system falls. It's like a house of cards. So it only takes one papal contradiction to undermine the system. And the reason that I think a lot of them don't think that way or care is precisely because they're evidentialists in their view of apologetics, usually, or they're foundationalists in their epistemology, and they think, well, that might appear to be a contradiction, but I can just stack up a lot of evidences over here on this other side, and that gives me a good possibility of being correct. Can you guys hear me? Somebody's tried to call me and it started messing up the phone. Can you guys hear me, or did it cut out? Hopefully it didn't cut out. Somebody give me a high five if it didn't cut out. Can you guys hear me, or is it done? It's cut out. Can you retro? You want to unmute? Jordan, you want to unmute?
Hello.
Oh, what's up?
Hey, just wanted to say I'm a fan, and God bless you and everything you're doing. And the world is waiting for Pastor Randy Balls. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. To the other guy, did you want to try to call back in? It's open forum now if you guys want to talk about anything related to history of the church, papacy, Protestantism. I thought Jeremy, don't you want to come up and chat? Jeremy Cubas.
Hello.
What's up,
Hey,
man?
big fan calling in. I was listening to the Ubi debate the other day. I'm Orthodox, so I should lead with that. And something came up in there, and I kind of maybe thought a bit introspective, but I wanted to get your opinion on it. And that was Voice of Reason pointed out. He said, "What's the deal with?" Pretty much, I'll just summarize it. Maybe I won't be precise, but he said, "What's the deal with all your different patriarchates arguing with each other about little things?" And Ubi responded, but just besides that, I was thinking about it sort of in a way that I would prefer it if the patriarchates did, in fact, take more time to argue and work out the fine details about little stuff, because in the Latin system or the Roman system, it just seems like if you have one dude in charge of everything, they can just quick throw in a Vatican II and then.
But that's not what happens in the Roman system. So it sounds like on paper that's what they would do and that they would be able to do that. But that's not what
Right.
happens. There's massive divisions in the Roman Catholic Church that are not solved and should be solved by papal fiat, and yet it's not. And another reason for that, for example, in terms of, say, liturgical abuse, in America, liturgical abuse was rampant in the last 20 years. And even if the papacy tried to do or say something, the liturgical commissions in America, which a lot of times were headed up by laity and liberals and gay people, they don't give a shit what Rome
Right.
says. So they just do whatever they want. So this is another point that, oh, well, now wait a minute. I thought the papacy was going to solve these problems, and it was the thing that would ensure, liturgical continuity and, reverence and worship. And yet it's been totally ineffectual in terms of the US's, liturgical abuses, as well as Germany and other places, which are really notorious. And it's the same with the German bishops pushing the, gay agenda. Francis didn't care about that. Francis let that run crazy and made many statements in favor of gay
Yeah, and
stuff.
then
So, again, the papacy doesn't do what the salesmen try to sell it as doing. And one last point on your question: these kinds of political jurisdictional squabbles are rampant in the first 1,000 years of
yeah,
Christianity.
it's
And he gave the example of the Meletian Schism. And if you read Basil's letters, Basil says Rome is worthless. Rome has not only contributed to the schism. Does that sound like somebody that believes in the Vatican
yeah, and
I
then he
idea?
does this move too in the debate where he tries to get Ubi to hold his position, and then he just never, it seems like during the whole time he never recognizes that maybe I shouldn't try to argue stuff that just gets boomeranged back on me. And it was just, I mean, I would say that Ubi had points better, I can tune in and listen to that, but for someone who's better at rhetoric, yeah, maybe Voice of Reason pulled it off there just because of his timbre, but
I
I don't
guess.
know.
I think, I've been watching and doing debates for 25 years, so I can see through the
Yeah,
kind of
right.
smoke and mirrors. But I think a lot of low tier people, they see smoke and mirrors and they find that in some way convincing or whatever. But uh, Jeremy, did you want to speak? Are you there? Does your mic work? We can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, how you
Okay,
doing,
hey,
man?
I'm doing well. So I have 9 kids, and so I'm outside with them. They're playing jumping on a trampoline. So if you hear kids
No
screaming,
problem.
it's
It's all
just
good.
that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the debate because I didn't listen to it. I just saw the tweets, and I was just responding to the tweets. And
That's fine.
generally, I've discussed. I have some good friends that are Orthodox, and generally, what I've found is not so much that Catholics don't understand um, that a papal contradiction will invalidate them. I think in general they think that Orthodox are uncharitably reading these papal statements as being contradiction as opposed to a clarification of a prior statement. And so normally, and again, I don't know how that debate went, but normally when there is a debate or discussion going on with Orthodox, the reason why Catholics bring up the supposed contradiction in Orthodoxy is not like a tu quoque, say you do it too, but it's simply saying that as Catholics, we actually don't dispute your guys's, I guess, supposed contradictions, nothing more than mere clarification.
No, it's just simply not true. For
Mhm.
example, if the papacy contradicts itself dogmatically, that's a systemic level
No, no, no. I
defeater, and
understand that. I'm not.
that's not equivalent. That's
Yes.
not equivalent to when a Catholic says to a
Right.
Orthodox person, as they
Again,
often
yeah.
do, "You guys have corrupt bishops too." So that's a
No,
false
no, no.
equivalence. They're two
Again,
different
I
arguments.
don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. And so I'm not saying that you guys do it too. That's exactly what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you do it too. Therefore, you are equally as defeated in the argument. All I'm simply saying is that we point that out because when you normally see a difference of opinion or supposed contradiction, you're able to point that it is not in fact a contradiction, but a clarification. And all we're saying.
Okay, let me give an example. Let me give an example of something that I think is not a
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
clarification but a
Yeah.
contradiction. So, have you read Mortalium Animos?
Yeah. I mean, not recently, but yeah, I've read it before.
Do you know what's in it?
You could inform me.
Well, wait a minute. You said you've
Yeah, a
read it.
while ago when I was there.
Okay. I don't expect you to repeat the entire encyclical, but what's it about?
I would have to look that up again, man. I don't know.
Well, now wait a minute. You said you've read it though.
Yes, a while ago. I'm 41 years old, man. Yeah, oh,
Okay. Have
42.
you read Satis Cognito?
No. I know some
Okay.
people sent me some links for some of them, but no.
Have you read Lamentabili San or the Syllabus of Errors?
Yeah, I have read that one. Not a complete.
Okay. What's that about? What's that about?
I mean, if you want me to look it up really quick, Don't scream.
Well, now wait a minute. Again, I'm not trying to be
Yeah,
rude to you, but this happens all the time with Roman Catholics claim that they've read stuff and they know their documents in their system, and then they say, "Oh, yeah, I've read that. Oh, I know
yeah.
about that," and then they don't know what they're talking about. So I'm not trying to be rude to
No,
you,
I'm not.
but I deal with people who
I
are
don't think you're.
constantly just
I honestly don't think you're being rude. So yeah.
okay. Well, I'm dubious. I'm dubious about the fact that you've read it
Okay.
because they're really well known. They're pretty famous,
Yep.
and just to bring it to your
Hmm.
memory, Motalium Animos is the 1928 encyclical by Pius
Hmm.
XI, and it's a pretty extensive condemnation of all forms of interfaith gathering, prayer, and worship. So, how could this be in 1928 the will of the Holy Spirit that it is anathema and it is a surrendering of the gospel? He says. But after Vatican II, not only is it okay to have interfaith gatherings with other so-called Christians, it's also okay to have these with other religions. How is that not a contradiction?
I mean, from my knowledge of Vatican II, and I'm not going to be the most knowledgeable person on this, but because I'm mostly a philosopher, I'm a philosophy professor, not really theology. But from my knowledge of Vatican II, it's that they're not saying that it is okay for you to replace the mass or your holy obligation with somebody of different faith, but that, for example, if there's like
What does it have to do with the holy day of obligation going to mass? Has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
right.
Interfaith gatherings being condemned. Are you familiar with Nostra Aetate?
I know I understand that interfaith gatherings are to be condemned, but again, the way that
No,
hold on, the way
you're not listening to the argument.
okay,
I said, are you familiar with Nostra
no,
Aetate?
somebody sent that to me.
So you're not familiar with
So,
the most famous document in Vatican II
so
about
somebody just
ecumenism?
sent that to me about, I don't know, an hour ago, and so I looked it up briefly, but no,
So you just now learned what the basic Roman Catholic documents are, and you're ready to try to say that it's not a contradiction. How do you know it's not a contradiction if you haven't read the document yet?
I never said that I'm coming in here to have a solid debate. You just asked me to come.
You said that you're ready to.
You just asked me to come
You
here and
said
talk
you're
to you.
ready to show that it's not. You said you're ready to show that it's not a
I
contradiction.
actually didn't.
Again, let me say.
Again,
Let
I
me let.
didn't say that. I'm ready to
Oh
show
my
that it's not a
gosh.
contradiction.
Okay. This is what we always get. This is why I have little patience with you
Mhm.
guys. You're so dishonest about the way that you come about things. You haven't read these things. Just be honest and say I haven't read it.
Which I already told you which ones I have not read and which ones I did.
I don't think you've read it Marcellium Animos, but even
Mhm.
if you haven't, it says no interfaith
Yep.
gatherings. And after Nostra Aetate, which is one of the Vatican II
Hmm.
documents about ecumenism, interfaith gatherings are now the work of the Holy Spirit. So which one is it?
I mean, for that one, I would have to read it. I don't know. To be honest, I would have to read that.
Okay.
But
All right. All right. I just have no patience for this bullshit. What's up, man? Alexius. And I mean, I know you. If you just popped in here, oh look how mean Jay's being. Do you understand that this is a recurring issue where Roman Catholics lie about what they know and what they've read? They say, "Oh, I know what that is." Well, I don't remember. I don't remember. I would think you would remember at least one of these documents if you've read any of these documents. How come I can remember these documents? I read Mortalium Animos maybe 10, 15 years ago. Well, it's not that hard for me to remember the name of the document. And it's just like with Not So Erudite. Oh, yeah, I've read all these philosophers. I don't know any of their works. I don't know what the content of the works is about, but I read that 10 years ago. I read that 5 years ago. I'm 41. He said, I'm 41. Big deal. I'm almost 50. So what? I mean, I'm almost 50 and I can remember the names of all these documents. It's just like that. See, and people think, oh, you're being mean. No, no, no. That's intellectual dishonesty. Okay. I don't respect intellectual dishonesty when a person says they've read these things, they say they know these arguments, they're ready to explain that it's not a contradiction. You're not being charitable in the reading. Now, wait a minute. How do you know that I'm not being charitable in the reading when you haven't done the reading? You see, I also think a lot of people nowadays, they don't think intellectual dishonesty is a sin. They don't think it's lying. They think, well, it's just what you do. Everybody does that. You just lie about what you've read and what you know, and you kind of give off the appearance of having knowledge, and so you could just lie about it. And I just blows my mind. No, you don't get to be intellectually dishonest about stuff. Go ahead, man. What's up?
Yeah, hello, Jay. Can I ask you about feminism? Is that relevant today? So I have a short question regarding feminism. I know one insane feminist journalist, Maya Gavashali. She's just a typical libtard from Russia. So basically, she tried to join radical feminist organization, but she was massively bullied by her own feminist leaders, and she had meltdown and ended up in a psychiatric ward. So yeah, my question is: would you consider feminism intrinsically worse than Islam? Because I think feminists seem to be total women haters. Thank you.
I mean, it's a fair question, except that I think that when it comes to any of these kind of false systems, it's really hard to suss out better or worse. I'm not saying you can never say better or worse, but I just see like the slavery and child marriage of Islam versus the degeneracy and ultimately hatred of patriarchy in feminism as basically both evil systems. So between the two, I don't even know which one's quote worse or better. I think they're both evil. Maddie, what's up? Maddie, you got to unmute.
Hello, Pete. Sorry, I
the
didn't realize you brought me up onto the stage.
That's okay. Hold on one second, Maddie. So Jub is asking a question. So the actually I mentioned 4 documents. They're really important for showing the problems in the modern Catholic system. The best book on this is the TAN book called 16 Papal Documents from TAN Publishers, TAN. That book actually has all the documents that are relevant to this discussion in it. But I mentioned Lamentabili Sane. I mentioned the Syllabus of Errors of Pius IX. I mentioned Satis Cognitum of Pope Leo the 13th. And I mentioned Mortalium Animos of Pius XI, condemning ecumenism. So those are really important documents. There's other ones that are really important too, like Mirari Vos. I think that's Pope Gregory the 16th. I'm going from memory. But all of those documents are in that TAN book of 16 papal documents. I recommend, I always tell people to get that, whether you're Orthodox or Catholic or whatever. Everybody should read the TAN book because it's the best way to see the radical difference between the pre-Vatican II and post-Vatican II church from the papal teaching.